Lily, you have a new job and a shiny new title to go with it.
I know. Thank you for noticing. It's very exciting. I am now the Chief Product Officer at BBC Maestro, a place where you can learn new skills from the best and most famous in their field, like learning to write children's books with David Walliams or Julia Donaldson, the creator of the Gruffalo. How cool is that? Anyway, what about you, Randy? Do you have a new job for the new year?
Oh, I'm still consulting and coaching, so nothing brand new, but I started with some new clients late last year, which, what a coincidence, goes together nicely with our theme for this episode. I wanted to talk to you about how you approach a new gig. How do you approach onboarding and make sure that it all goes well?
Well, this pairs very nicely with last week's episode about actually landing the job, doesn't it? Almost like we planned it.
Almost. I mean, it's not actually true in this case, but, let's stick with that.
But yes, this is very much on my mind at the moment, given I'm going through this exact process. So let's dig into it with our very special guest for this week, us. We've had lots of jobs and talked with lots of people, so we're going to run through our top tips for how to get things off on the right foot.
And after that, it's entirely up to you. We'll be right back after the music with our advice.
The Product Experience is brought to you by Mind the Product. Every week on the podcast, we talk to the best product people from around the globe. Visit mindtheproduct.com to catch up on past episodes and discover more.
Browse for free or become a Mind the Product member to unlock premium content, discounts to our conferences around the world, and training opportunities. Mind the Product also offers free Product Tank meetups in more than 200 cities. And there's probably one near you.
Okay, so before we get started with this, I do want to start with a great big it depends, because
Drink!
When you're thinking about your plan for when you start a new job, it can be massively impacted by the company that you're going into and the state of the affairs that you're, walking into. So the quality of your onboarding schedule, if, there's an HR team or a very organized manager that you're going to be reporting into who has put something together for you, which gives you everything or, a lot of the context that you need. But if you don't, you might walk into a role where there's nothing at all, and it's literally you turn up and your diary's empty and you have an initial kind of intro meeting and then it's kind of left up to you to decide what you need to do. So you have to just kind of make your own onboarding schedule if that is the case. And then also the quality and the maturity of the actual organization's documentation, training, processes, tools that can vary massively from, everyone just documenting stuff in their own sort of siloed way in multiple different tools to it being very structured and very controlled, and that can have a big impact on what you do and how long it takes you to get familiar with what you need to understand about the business.
And I've read a lot of really interesting guides about starting a new job, and there's some great stuff that's very common advice that works for any kind of role. Things like make a purchase and put it through expenses in your first 30 days just to make sure the system works, and double check your paycheck and get in on the pension and all kinds of things like that. And we are not going to talk about any of that today. It's common, it's great advice. You should absolutely follow it. But the stuff we're going to talk about is specific to product management. So or people working in product teams. What are the types of things that you need to make sure get done, whether they're planned for you or not, to make sure you're successful in, say, your first 90 days? So we've put together 5 basic themes. And should we start with the first one?
Let's do it. And I think you should kick this one off, Randy, because I know that it's one of your your acronyms and frameworks.
It's not my acronym, but it's one we've talked about a few times before. It's OODA, the OODA loop, which stands for observe, orient, and then decision and action. It comes out of a military thing, and I hate using military acronyms, but this is a really good and useful one. So the important thing is when you go into a new job, you're very tempted to do stuff. And it's a very bad idea to do stuff before going through that observe and orient stage. Make sure you really understand what's going on. Because otherwise, you're just going in with no context. You're going on based on what happened in the interview process, what your manager told you during onboarding, which may not always be the shared truth from everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a few, things that are part of this process. So one of the things I really like to do is find out about kind of previous projects, presentations, analyses that have been done, and kind of more recently, like, within the last sort of 3 to 6, maybe even 12 months, actually. But definitely, what's been presented to the board or what's been presented to the team in the last quarter that could give you some relevant context for like where everyone is at now, what analysis has been done recently, whether it's competitor analysis or user research analysis on a specific area. If you can find out, all of those things and get links and just understand, like read through the documentation, pick people's brains. That's a really good place to start with this observe, orient, decide and act framework.
I like the picking people's brains more because I find it gives me a lot more context and tells me what hasn't been written down in those documents. I mean, the documents are fantastic. Don't get me wrong. You absolutely need to be familiar with them as they're the common things that everyone is going to be referring to, and it's what's been presented. But there's so much assumption about what those documents mean or what was said in meetings that wasn't on the slide or on the page itself. So I have a stakeholder interview template that I use, and we'll put the link in the show notes for this. And it goes through things with people about what are your motivations? What's your definition of success? What are your OKRs? What's your bonusable measure? What's going well? What's going poorly? And just get people to tell you the stuff that's not written down on the page. And if you find that different stakeholders, if you find that marketing and sales and tech and whoever else have different definitions of success, ones that potentially compete with each other, that's invaluable to know before you start moving forward on anything. And there's some great techniques to use in those interviews that have been documented out by people like Julia Whitney and Emily Weber that we've interviewed previously. And if you use my link, then you'll get those resources as well.
Yeah, that's really great. Interviewing people, absolutely, 100% really important. And I think I have this kind of checklist myself of like people that I need to get close to. So I'll go through finance, legal, if there's a compliance team or person, you want to speak to them, data, who's your data protection officer, get to know who they are, marketing, as well as engineering, design, research, like all of that shebang too. And then also I think, Randy kind of alluded to it there, like sometimes you can identify then like some sort of misalignments between where people are focused or kind of what their motivations are. And it might not necessarily be possible or, or within your sort of remit to solve those misalignments. But I think if you can identify them, then it'll make it much easier for you to then navigate around them and be kind of understanding of the perspectives that people bring to like future conversations that you have.
Yeah, and taking the tone of the company as well, just checking the temperature, what's the vibe like, who needs support, who desperately needs a break or is close to burnout, who's been underappreciated, and, who are the secret heroes that are incredibly valuable but might not have been recognized. Getting all that stuff out of the way and getting a good understanding of that will just help you make friends and influence people so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. I've walked into a few jobs where, it's been obvious fairly quickly who is like literally at burnout. They've maybe been juggling like a few different roles. And you just want to kind of take a few things off their plate, and they're just like, thank you for being here and taking the stuff. And you can kind of win friends really easily by, by identifying where you can support other people and help them out and just give them a bit of a break if they need it. I think also as part of that, if you're going into a company that's grown a lot, or there's been lots of change, or they've been kind of, had a lot of workload on the team and are close to burnout, then things might not have been done in a particularly mature or like perfect kind of ideal way. And so going in with a bit of empathy for, this is the situation that I'm walking into, and a bit of understanding of like, maybe it wasn't done perfectly, but that's not because this person isn't good at their job. It's just because they were having to like manage so much stuff, and being sympathetic towards that, I think, is really important.
Almost like empathy is an important part of our job.
Cool.
And
okay.
Speaking of empathy, so it's not only for internal people. You also want to get close to your customer and understand what's going on with them, their pain points, and what they find incredibly valuable about you, what parts of the product they really love, and what parts maybe they're not using so much. What do you think about this one, Lily? I know we had a discussion earlier, and we had slightly different takes on this, on how to get close to your customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? I love that phrase, getting close to the customer, because I think, as product people, we can be a bit sort of wordy with, how we, customer-centered design or user-centered design or blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff. But basically, if you just tell everyone that you want to just get close to the customer and understand them better and understand how they're using the product and stuff like that, or who they are and things, then everyone across the business will understand that, and I think they'll kind of appreciate you for it. So just using that phrase of like getting close to the customer, I think, is really powerful and a good phrase to use. But yeah, I mean, my kind of take on how to do this is like, it's about that qual, and interviewing customers yourself, and just doing like really generic user research interviews to begin with, really sort of open, not with any agenda other than just like meeting some of the customers that have bought from you recently and understanding what their experience is like. Why did they buy from you? Or, why did they start using your product and stuff, and what was their experience like? And then also the kind of the quant side of things, of any surveys that have been done, or if there haven't been any surveys recently, like, maybe put something, again, like quite high level and generic together, just so that you can understand a bit more about who your customers are and what their motivations are. And I know, Randy, you came at this more from a kind of B2B point of view of like how you get close to the customer when you're in that more B2B environment.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that whether it's B2B or B2C, and I'll stick with B2B for the moment, but the point stands, it's you potentially have different personas to consider, and you need to look at all of them. So with B2B, you have your users, but you also have the purchasers, and they're very rarely the same person. So you need to look at it from both perspectives. And we tell people, when you start a new job, spend some time on the support lines, dig through the support queues and things like that. And that is invaluable. It's wonderful, but it tells you what your users are doing, not necessarily your purchasers. And it also only tells you about people who have had problems. And it might give you a very biased perspective of the world. So it's really important to have that, but also to keep the context in mind. So you need to talk to happy customers as well, or people who have not picked up the phone, or they may not be happy, but they haven't gotten to the point of calling. And people who potentially are lapsed customers, or not lapsed, inactive customers, ones who are in danger of churn, and understand why they're not being as active. So going out and working with account management and sales and going on customer calls and pre-calls is incredibly important. But just try and spend some time with people. And if you can do it face-to-face, I know it's really hard these days, but face-to-face, especially when you're dealing with new people, with new industries, with new things, and establishing relationships and finding out the things that they wouldn't tell you in a scheduled call in a limited amount of time. If you can grab a coffee with them outside of your scheduled time and things like that, you just get onto different subjects. They'll tell you different things, and you'll get insights you would never get any other way.
Great advice. Okay, so this one, our next kind of theme, I love, And we pulled together a few different ideas, but under one heading, which was to map everything, which sounds like that would be an awful lot of mapping. And it probably will be, but it'll be worthwhile.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I mean, even if you're doing it at high levels in the first instance, and just understanding what is the strategy, map that, what does acquisition look like? What does usage look like? What does retention look like? Just a general flow of that, or the general service design or the customer lifecycle. Just make sure you're able to diagram these things out and be able to tell a coherent story. And if there's always the question of, does this mapping already exist internally? I love asking that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of touched on it slightly there, but my thing that I always do in every company is really try to get under the skin of the technical architecture, the data stack, how data flows through the different systems that we have, and kind of mapping all of that out, because I think that gives you a much better grip and understanding on how the product is working. Even if you're not from an engineering background, you can get the engineering team to walk you through what the technical architecture looks like. And also if there's a technical strategy of like, this is what it looks like today, but this is where we're headed. Getting an understanding of what's going on there, I think, is really important.
There's always a technical strategy that it's going to change in some way, but understanding what is the problem that they're trying to solve, why are they doing it, what was the reason some decisions were made in the past, and why they're no longer relevant, it's fantastic.
Yeah. And then on the kind of finance side as well, having a walkthrough of the financial model, if you're able to get one, or just a kind of an understanding of where your role fits with the overall financial model. Maybe there's some assumptions in the forecasting around churn or acquisition or something like that that really impacts, the parts of the product or the product that you're working on. So just knowing what that looks like and being familiar with it, so that if you make changes and if you make an impact, like understanding what impact that has on the broader financial model for the business.
And getting in the context for that as well is, but sometimes, if you're in a big corporate, you might need to understand that not all decisions are equal. Sometimes there's OpEx and CapEx that you need to worry about. Or if you're in a startup, you dealing with time horizons around funding and runway and things like that, and understanding that, yes, you may have some issues, but these are longer term issues and they're not ever going to get solved unless you deal with the shorter term issues and things like that. So making really understanding financially what the levers are and how you're going to make that work within the organization.
Yeah.
So you also, Lily, had brought up the idea of looking outside the business at the rest of the landscape and mapping that.
Yeah, exactly. So I often, when you go and work somewhere, you'll have like an idea of the direct competitors, and there will be, in general, there'll be businesses that are doing the same thing as you. So they're not always necessarily competitors from the customer's point of view, if that makes sense. Let me explain that more. If a competitor, let's take Netflix, for example. So you might say Netflix's competitors are Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, Now TV in the UK anyway. Whereas, I think there was a famous saying of like Netflix's biggest competitor is sleep.
Or video games, or it's anything competing for the entertainment dollar. Yeah,
exactly. So, go outside the sort of direct competitors and think about what actually is competing for your customers' time, but then also looking at the competitor landscape. So that's kind of looking at adjacent industries or products or other things that are doing similar stuff to you, but in a slightly different way, so that you can understand more about how they've approached it, the business models that they've used, the design patterns that exist within those tools, so that you can really start to build up a really good picture of like where your product sits in this whole space that you're in.
I'd also urge you to map out the compliance and regulatory landscape. You're not, when you first come into an industry or to a company, you're probably not going to fully understand it straight away, and that's okay. But understanding when you need to ask questions, if you're in financial services, when does Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever the appropriate regulatory environment you're dealing with, or if you're dealing with personally identifying information, when do you need to ask questions? When are you potentially going to run up against stuff? It's just a really useful shorthand to say, these are the areas where I can play and make decisions based on what I know now. And these are areas where I need to ask more questions before I'm able to make decisions. Speaking of not making decisions yet, this is my favorite one because I wrote it down in our outlined doc as shut up. So I will do that. And Lily, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, shut up, Randy. That's the only time I've ever been allowed to say that. Just kidding. I say it all the time. No, absolutely. It's so tempting to, get really excited about a new job, learn a little bit of stuff, and then make a load of plans and fill in all the gaps, like with assumptions of like, oh, it's probably this or probably that, or, not even kind of think it through that you've actually made assumptions and just like go a bit gung-ho into the into making changes and getting stuck into work. And I think sometimes we can feel like we're only being productive if we're delivering something, but really, we're adding value by expanding our learning, expanding our understanding, and that is so important. And so, setting the expectation to the rest of the business that when you start, that's your top priority. And you might get given a piece of work that needs to be picked up and delivered quickly or something, but I would urge you to try and push back on your line manager or other people within the team and say, look, I just really, really want to understand the business and what's happening and what's going on before I take on anything that's in flight right now.
Yeah, I would temper that one a little bit in that, if you're given a very specific task to do and there are guardrails or guidelines around it, it is important to show that you can deliver, and that is important. That said, you will see things that seem obviously wrong and that you want to fix. And those are the ones that I always need to step back from. I tend to write them down and then put a date on them of when I can come back and I'm allowed to actually deal with it. Because the reality is, usually these things are also obvious to other people. And there's a reason it hasn't been done, or it hasn't been tried, or it has been tried, or it's been deprioritized for a reason. And so the first time I see it, I'm not going to do anything about it. I might ask somebody about it, but I'm not going to try and change it. Not unless somebody tells me this is something we've tried and we've screwed up, but you've come in with different experience. What do you think? And, I'll share that quietly and talk to a few people about it before trying to make a change like that. It's really hard because sometimes you just look at these things and say, oh God, I've done this so much better at other places, or it's so obvious. Why don't they just do this? And that breaks the rule of using the most dangerous word in technology, which is just. Anytime you're saying, why don't we just do this? You really need to take a step back and check yourself and take a bit of a pause and time out before making sure that is actually the right thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that I find really difficult is the tools that people are using. Because quite often I've found like coming into businesses, people will have like started using tools and not really like learned that tool 100%. And then everything's moving quickly, so everyone just makes do with like working with it in a slightly bizarre way or whatever. Or you have your own favorite tools that you love using, and so you just want to come in and just go, oh, I know you guys using this, but actually this is so much better, let's just use this. Or you might not even ask anyone, you just do it anyway because it's easier for you. And I would just really sort of like urge you not to do that straight away and just like try and understand and work with the tools that are there at the moment. And then if they really don't work, like, introduce the idea of switching tools, but in a very kind of measured way, rather than just kind of willy-nilly changing everything all over the place.
It's worth taking a look at an article or two about change management theory and process if you're going to try and change the tools an org uses, because it is fraught with consequence. It can be really powerful when done well, but that's the key thing of making sure you do it well. And remember, just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's broken for everybody else. And that's the other key thing. If it isn't broken or isn't recognized as broken by other people, don't fix it. You won't be thanked for it. Even if you make it the way you like it, you might be breaking it for lots of other people.
Absolutely. And then the other thing that I found, I don't know if you found this, Randy, but I find when I start somewhere, if I'm having those one-to-one interviews with people, generally people are really will open up quite quickly because you're interested and because you're kind of within that sort of role that spans across everyone's work. So you could potentially have the opportunity to help this person out. So often people will really open up around the problems that they're experiencing and maybe their opinions of like what's going on in the company and how other people are contributing. And I think this is where you have to be kind of very careful on a few different counts. One is to not break that trust by then going, oh, so-and-so said, like, you're not very good at your job or whatever. And then also having...
Please tell me you haven't done that one.
No, I definitely haven't. Also having a bit of empathy of like, it's been, it might have been like fraught before, but, things are changing and you're here to make things better, not worse. So try and kind of make sure that you are keeping the trust of those people and keeping the faith of those people and taking it as information, but using it in a positive way to help people out and to help fix, potential issues or relationships that aren't currently working.
But don't solutionize in those meetings either. Don't promise, oh, I'll go get that fixed right away, because you have no idea how hard that will be, what might have happened, and things like that. And if you tell people you're going to fix it and you don't, you'll have lost that trust really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is just like trying not to let it influence your opinions too much. So understanding the position of other people, but not necessarily taking that position until you have formulated evidence of the situation or kind of what's happening. So I'm kind of like waffling a bit there, but hopefully you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. Is like, don't just take everyone's word for what the situation is and make your own mind up if you can.
I totally take that on board. That makes a lot of sense. But at this point, we've gone through all this, and it sounds like it's an awful lot of work. I mean, some of this makes total sense and is obvious stuff that we would just do anytime, and some of it is stuff we really have to be mindful of. So can we end this on a high note? What's our last piece of advice?
So my last piece of advice is have fun. Like, seriously though, this starting a new job for a product person, hopefully you're naturally curious and you want to solve problems and you like a challenge. So starting a new job, you should embrace all of that part of starting a new job. Being super curious, meeting lots of people, finding out lots of information, and starting to put together a plan for like how you can have an impact in the business. And then we haven't really talked about it, but I would say that it takes like between 3 to 9 months to like really understand a business, and possibly even longer than that. What's your take, Randy? How long do you reckon it should take or does take for you to actually feel properly embedded and really understand the business in its entirety?
Oh, in its entirety, it takes ages, but that said, you can't let that stop you from actually diving in and doing stuff. So be mindful of not doing too much too quickly. But when you are interviewing people, when you are mapping things out, when you are trying to accelerate your curve of becoming productive and knowing stuff, just remember, you're actually doing a lot. You're meeting people, you're embedding yourself, you are learning stuff. And the last thing I'd say, along with have fun, and a way to make sure that you're having fun, is this stuff can be exhausting, mentally exhausting, because you're just taking on so many new concepts and trying to get your brain screwed on right and really orient yourself within this new environment. And it's amazing. There's so many toys to play with, so many people to meet, so many exciting things to learn. But it can be a bit wearying. So just make sure to schedule yourself some downtime. Make sure to knock off at a reasonable time and give your brain time to absorb these new things. And make sure you keep coming in with new questions. But yeah, I think you'll find 3 months in, 6 months in, a year in, you'll still have questions. There will still be things you don't know, but there will be a lot fewer of them. And the next time you're onboarding somebody else, you realize how much you actually do know about the company, about the processes, and about the people. So Lily, you're a week into the new job? How long do you think it's going to take?
Oh my goodness. I think it'll take me like a good 6 months to properly embed in the business and like get to know everybody properly, get to know the market, the products, start to have an effect on a really, really positive effect on the strategy. I don't know. Ask me again in 6 months or 3 months and we'll see. Maybe it'll be quicker.
Okay, we'll do a check-in.
Sounds good. But I'm glad you reminded me that I need to not clock off really late, because it is that thing of you're meeting so many people and then at the end of the day you're like, oh no, I'll just do some extra reading of something or other. But yeah, no, I should definitely make sure that I step away at a reasonable time. So thanks for that reminder, Randy.
See, this is what happens when you don't tell me to shut up.
And speaking of stepping away from the computer, I think that
shutting up.
Yeah. I think that just about concludes our chat about starting a new job. So if you've got any tips, please share them with us.
You can tweet us, you can mastodon us, you can get us any which way. Carrier pigeon might work, but let's stick with the social media for now.
The Product Experience is the first
and the best
podcast from Mind the Product. Our hosts are me, Lily Smith,
and me, Randy Silver.
Lou Ron Pratt is our producer and Luke Smith is our editor.
Our theme music is from Hamburg-based band POW, that's P-A-U. Thanks to Arnie Kittler, who curates both Product Tank and MTP Engage in Hamburg, and who also plays bass in the band, for letting us use their music. You can connect with your local product community via Product Tank, regular free meetups in over 200 cities worldwide.
If there's not one near you, maybe you should think about starting one. To find out more, go to mindtheproduct.com/product tank.